A paramedic arrived with a perfect report. Every vital sign documented, every timestamp precise. The timeline matched perfectly with the official military accident report. But one experienced nurse saw something that did not add up. A detail so small that everyone else missed it. And when she started asking questions, people with power wanted her silenced. This is the true story of a healthcare professional who risked her career and her safety to uncover what really happened to a wounded soldier. A story about hidden truths, military cover-ups, and one woman who refused to look the other way when something felt wrong. The sound of helicopter blades cutting through the night air still haunts me. It was 2:47 in the morning when the call came through the hospital intercom. Code Alpha, military transport incoming. Critical patient. I remember running down the hallway toward the emergency bay, my heart already racing before I even knew what I was about to face. My name is Rebecca Hayes. I have been an emergency room nurse at Mercy Regional Hospital in Virginia Beach for 14 years. I have treated gunshot wounds, car accident victims, drug overdoses, and everything in between. I thought I had seen it all, but nothing prepared me for what happened that night. The helicopter landed on our rooftop pad, and within seconds they were wheeling him in. A soldier, young, maybe 23 or 24 years old. His uniform was torn and bloodied. His face was pale and covered in sweat. The two paramedics moved with military precision, rattling off vitals as they pushed the gurney past me. Heart rate elevated but stable. Blood pressure dropping but manageable. Injury sustained during routine training exercise at 2200 hours. Transport initiated at 2230. All standard protocol. The lead paramedic handed me the report. Everything was documented perfectly. Too perfectly. I glanced down at the patient, and that is when I saw it. On his right forearm, just above his wrist, there was a bruise. Not from tonight. This bruise was old. The edges were already turning that yellowish-green color that only comes after 4 or 5 days of healing. I looked up at the paramedic. He was already walking away. But for just a split second, our eyes met. And in that brief moment, I saw something I recognized. Fear. He knew I had seen it, and he knew what it meant. The timeline they gave me was a lie. If this story has already hooked you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now, because what comes next will surprise you even more. I could not stop thinking about that bruise. During my entire shift, as I worked on stabilizing the soldier, my mind kept going back to it. I have been doing this long enough to know exactly how bruises heal. The discoloration, the timeline. That bruise was not fresh. It was at least 4 days old, maybe 5. But according to the report, this soldier had been injured just hours ago during a training exercise. The math did not add up. As I examined him more closely, I found other inconsistencies. There were rope burns on both of his wrists. Thin, precise. The kind you get from being restrained for an extended period of time. But there was nothing in the paramedic report about restraints. Nothing about why a soldier in a simple training accident would have marks like that. His injuries told a story that contradicted everything I had been told. I started taking detailed notes in my personal logbook. I documented every inconsistency, every mark that did not match the official timeline. I photographed the bruises with my phone, making sure to capture the discoloration that proved they were older than reported. That is when Dr. Michael Carter walked into the room. He is the head of our emergency department, and he has worked with military cases before. He saw me taking photos, and his expression changed immediately. He asked me what I was doing. I told him I was documenting inconsistencies in the patient report. He looked at me for a long moment, then told me to delete the photos. I asked him why. He said this case was under military jurisdiction, and I needed to follow protocol exactly as given. No questions, no extra documentation. Just do my job and move on. But I am a nurse. My job is to care for patients and advocate for their well-being, and something was very wrong here. Dr. Carter must have seen the resistance in my eyes because he stepped closer and lowered his voice. He told me that some cases are bigger than us, that asking questions could put my career at risk. Then he walked out, leaving me standing there with a dying soldier and a head full of questions I was not supposed to ask. Thank you for staying with me this far. It shows that you feel the same thing I felt when I lived through all of this. So go ahead and subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because what comes next changes everything. I went home that morning, but I could not sleep. I kept seeing those rope burns, that old bruise, the fear in the paramedic's eyes. I knew something terrible had happened to that soldier, something that occurred days before he was officially reported injured. Someone had created a false timeline. Someone wanted everyone to believe this was a simple training accident. But why? What were they hiding? When I returned to the hospital for my next shift, I made a decision that could cost me everything. I waited until the late hours when most of the administrative staff had gone home. Then I accessed the hospital digital database and pulled up the soldier's file. What I found made my hands start shaking. The ambulance dispatch log showed the emergency call came in at 22:15 hours. But when I cross-referenced that with the medical assessment of his injuries, nothing matched. The bruising patterns indicated trauma that was at least 96 hours old. The rope burns showed prolonged prolonged restraint over multiple days. His blood work revealed signs of dehydration that suggested he had been without proper fluids for an extended period. This was not a training accident from last night. This soldier had been injured, restrained, and possibly held somewhere for days before he was brought to our hospital. Someone had fabricated the entire timeline. I printed every document I could access, lab reports, injury assessments, the original dispatch call. I stuffed them into my bag and logged out of the system. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I knew I had just crossed a line. I knew that accessing these files without authorization could end my career. But I also knew that if I did not do this, the truth would disappear forever. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Write it in the comments. It is incredible to see people from so many places following stories like this. 3 days passed and I heard nothing. I started to think maybe I had gotten away with it. Maybe no one noticed that I had accessed those files. I was wrong. On Thursday afternoon, a man in a military uniform walked into the hospital. He was not there to visit the patient. He went straight to the administrative office. I watched from the nurse's station as he spoke with Dr. Carter and our hospital administrator. They talked for almost 30 minutes, and then all three of them turned and looked directly at me through the glass window. My stomach dropped. The officer left shortly after, but Dr. Carter called me into his office immediately. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He told me that military officials were aware I had accessed classified patient files without authorization. He said they knew I had been asking questions about the case. He asked me directly if I had copied any documents or taken any photos. I lied. I told him no. I could see he did not believe me. He leaned back in his chair and told me a story. 5 years ago, he said, there was another nurse at this hospital. Experienced, well-respected. She had questioned a military case similar to this one. She found inconsistencies and pushed for answers. Within 2 weeks, she was transferred to a hospital in Alaska. No choice, no appeal. Her reputation was destroyed. She never worked in emergency medicine again. He looked at me and said he would hate to see the same thing happen to me, that I should think very carefully about what I do next. After I left his office, my colleague Sarah pulled me aside in the hallway. She is older than me, close to retirement. She told me to drop this immediately. She said I had no idea how deep this went, or how dangerous it could be, but I could not let it go. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the documents I had printed. A young soldier was dying and no one cared enough to ask why. Have you ever been through something like this where you had to stay silent or hide the truth? Write in the comments what you would have done. I did not expect anyone to reach out to me, but 4 days after the soldier arrived, I received a text message from an unknown number. It said, "We need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop on 15th Street tomorrow at noon. Come alone." I knew I should not go. Every instinct told me this could be a trap, but I also knew that whoever sent that message might have answers. The next day, I walked into that coffee shop and immediately recognized him, the paramedic, the one who had brought the soldier to our hospital. He was sitting in the back corner, wearing civilian clothes, a baseball cap pulled low over his face. I sat down across from him and waited for him to speak. He did not look at me at first. He just stared at his coffee cup and said he should not be here, that he could lose his job or worse. But he said he could not stay silent anymore. Then he told me everything. He said the soldier's name was Corporal Daniel Jensen. 4 days before he arrived at our hospital, Daniel had been part of a classified operation at a military testing facility 200 miles from here. Something went wrong during the operation. There was an exposure, chemical or biological, he was not sure, but several soldiers were affected. Instead of reporting the incident through proper channels, the commanding officers decided to cover it up. They held the affected soldiers in isolation for days while they tried to figure out how to handle the situation. But Daniel's condition deteriorated rapidly. They realized he was going to die if he did not get real medical treatment, so they created a fake training accident. They brought him to a civilian hospital where no one would ask the right questions. They gave us a false timeline and hoped we would just treat him and move on. The paramedic looked at me with exhausted eyes. He said he had been ordered to deliver that false report, that if he refused, he would face court-martial. But seeing me question the inconsistencies had given him hope that maybe someone would finally expose the truth. Before I could ask more questions, he stood up. He handed me a flash drive and told me it contained copies of the real incident report. Then he walked out of the coffee shop, and I never saw him again. I went home and plugged the flash drive into my laptop. What I found was worse than I imagined. The files contained internal military communications about an unauthorized chemical weapons test that had gone catastrophically wrong. Corporal Daniel Jensen and 3 other soldiers had been exposed to an experimental nerve agent during what was supposed to be a controlled demonstration. The exposure happened happened at 1700 hours on a Tuesday. But instead of immediately transporting them to a military medical facility, the commanding officer ordered them placed in quarantine. For 4 days, those soldiers suffered without proper medical treatment while officials debated how to contain the situation without triggering a federal investigation. By the time they decided to move Daniel to a civilian hospital, permanent damage had already been done. His organs were failing. His nervous system was compromised. He was dying. And instead of being honest about what happened, they created an elaborate cover story. They staged a training accident scene. They falsified medical reports. They coached the paramedics on exactly what to say. The documents included photos of the testing facility, incident logs, communications between high-ranking officials discussing how to bury the evidence. There were even emails debating whether it would be easier to let the soldiers die rather than risk exposure. I sat there reading through everything, tears streaming down my face. These were not just documents. This was proof of criminal negligence. Proof that people in positions of power had valued their careers more than the lives of the soldiers under their command. I knew what I had to do. I needed to go public. I needed to find someone who could help me expose this. But I also knew that the moment I did, my life would never be the same. I found an investigative journalist named Marcus Webb, who had previously covered military corruption cases. I sent him an encrypted email with some of the documents from the flash drive. He responded within hours, and we agreed to meet. We met at a diner 40 miles outside the city, away from anyone who might recognize us. Marcus reviewed everything I gave him, the documents, the photos, the communications. His face grew darker with every page he read. He told me this was one of the most significant military cover-ups he had ever seen. If we could verify everything and publish it, people would go to prison. Careers would be destroyed. The military would be forced to answer for what they did. But he also warned me about the consequences. He said that powerful people would do everything they could to discredit me. They would claim I stole classified documents. They would question my mental stability. They would destroy my reputation and possibly file criminal charges against me. He asked me if I was prepared for that. I told him I did not care what happened to me. A soldier was dying because people chose to cover their mistakes rather than save his life. If exposing that truth meant sacrificing my career, then so be it. We spent the next week verifying every detail. Marcus contacted former military personnel who confirmed the testing facility existed. He found records of similar incidents that had been quietly buried. He interviewed the families of the other soldiers who had been exposed, families who had been told their sons died in training accidents. Everything checked out. We were ready to publish. Then everything fell apart. The night before the story was supposed to go live, Marcus called me in a panic. His editor had killed the piece. Someone high up in the government had contacted the publication and threatened legal action. They claimed the documents were classified, and publishing them would violate national security laws. Marcus tried to fight it, but the decision was final. The story was dead. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. We had done everything right. We had the proof. We had the truth. And still, they had won. The 2 days after the story was killed, things got worse. I came home from a night shift and found my apartment door slightly open. I knew I had locked it. I pushed the door open carefully and saw that everything had been searched. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered. My laptop was gone. So was the flash drive. Whoever broke in knew exactly what they were looking for. I called the police, but when they arrived and I tried to explain what was happening, I could see they did not believe me. They filed a report for a burglary, but I knew they thought I was paranoid. That night, I stayed at a friend's house because I was too scared to sleep in my own apartment. At 3 a.m, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was cold and mechanical, clearly being disguised by some kind of device. The voice said I had made a serious mistake, that I had stolen classified military documents and shared them with unauthorized personnel, that if I continued down this path, I would face federal charges. Then the voice said something that made my blood run cold. They said my sister lives in Philadelphia with her 2 children, that it would be a shame if anything happened to them. The line went dead. I sat there shaking, unable to breathe. They were threatening my family. My sister had nothing to do with this. Her kids were innocent, but they were willing to use them to keep me quiet. I realized then that I was dealing with people who had no limits, people who would do anything to protect their secrets. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt genuinely afraid, not for myself, for everyone I loved. I tried to warn the paramedic who had given me the flash drive. I sent messages to the number he had texted me from. No response. I asked around carefully, trying to find out where he was stationed. No one seemed to know who I was talking about. It was like he had vanished. Marcus called me and said his sources had gone silent. Everyone who had been willing to talk suddenly refused to return his calls. I went back to work at the hospital and tried to act normal, but I could feel eyes on me constantly. My colleagues avoided me. Dr. Carter barely spoke to me. I knew they had been told to keep their distance. Then, 8 days after the soldier had arrived, I got the call. It was 4 in the morning. I was not on shift, but they contacted me anyway. Corporal Daniel Jensen had died, cardiac arrest, despite all efforts to save him. By the time I arrived at the hospital, they had already moved his body. The death certificate listed cause of death as complications from traumatic injuries sustained in a training accident. There was no mention of chemical exposure, no mention of the days he spent in unauthorized quarantine, no mention of the negligence that killed him. I pulled up his medical file to find all my notes. They were gone. Every inconsistency I had documented had been removed from the system. The photos I had taken had been deleted from the cloud backup. My access logs showed I had never even viewed his file. It was like I had never questioned anything, like none of it had ever happened. I stood in that empty hallway and realized they had won. They had erased the truth completely. The soldier was dead. The evidence was gone. The witnesses had disappeared, and I was left with nothing but memories of what I knew had really happened. Months went by. I continued working at the hospital. I followed every rule. I asked no questions. I kept my head down and did my job, but I never forgot. I never stopped thinking about Corporal Daniel Jensen, about the truth that died with him. I thought it was over, that I had lost completely. Then one afternoon, 6 months after Daniel's death, I came home and found an envelope in my mailbox. No postage, no return address. Just my name written in neat block letters. I opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, high-resolution images of a military testing facility, documents with names that had not been redacted, a full incident report detailing exactly what happened the day Daniel and the other soldiers were exposed, and a handwritten note on plain white paper. It said, "Thank you for trying. Some of us still remember. Some of us still care about the truth. This is for Daniel. Make sure his story does not die with him." I do not know who left that envelope. Maybe it was the paramedic. Maybe it was one of the other soldiers who survived the exposure. Maybe it was someone inside the military who could not live with the cover-up anymore. But whoever it was, they had given me something precious. They had given me hope. I made copies of everything and locked the originals in a safety deposit box. I contacted Marcus again and told him what I had received. He said the media landscape had changed, that there were independent platforms now that could not be pressured the way traditional publications could. We started working on the story again. This time we were more careful. We built a network of sources who were willing to go on record. We gathered additional evidence that corroborated everything in the documents, and slowly, piece by piece, we rebuilt the case. I do not know when the story will finally be published. I do not know if it will change anything, or if justice will ever be served. But I do know this. I did not give up. I fought for the truth even when it seemed impossible. And somewhere out there, other people are fighting too. People who believe that some things are worth risking everything for. People who refuse to let powerful institutions bury their mistakes. People who remember that every life matters, even when those in charge would rather forget. And you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have risked everything to discover the truth, or followed orders to protect yourself? Write here in the comments what you think about this story. And if you believe that cases like this deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel now, because we have many more real, impactful, and almost impossible to believe stories waiting for you. Turn on the notification bell so you do not miss any. And do not forget to watch the next recommended video, where another nurse reveals an even more disturbing secret that changed her life forever.